Captain Sarah Mitchell had always known she was different from other pilots. At 28, she had already broken 3 military aviation records and earned her wings faster than anyone in her class. But standing in the sterile briefing room at Naval Air Station Oceana, watching Commander Jack Reaper Harrison flip through her personnel file with a dismissive frown, she realized that her achievements meant nothing to the man who controlled her future. The F-35 Lightning II program was the crown jewel of military aviation, and Sarah had spent 2 years fighting for the chance to prove herself worthy of its cockpit. The stealth fighter represented everything she had worked towards since she was 8 years old, watching Blue Angels soar over her hometown airshow. Her father, a retired Marine pilot, had told her that dreams were just wishes until you made them reality through blood, sweat, and determination. Commander Harrison was a legend in the SEAL community. His weathered face told stories of countless missions in hostile territories, and his reputation for being ruthlessly selective about his team members was well known throughout the naval aviation community. He had personally overseen the integration of the F-35 program with special operations, and his word carried the weight of gospel when it came to pilot selection. "Captain Mitchell," Harrison's voice cut through the silence like a blade, "your test scores are impressive, your flight hours are adequate, but this isn't about flying pretty patterns and training exercises. This is about life and death decisions, made in split seconds while enemy missiles are painting targets on your aircraft." Sarah maintained her rigid posture, her hands clasped behind her back in perfect military bearing. She had heard variations of this speech before from other commanders who questioned whether a woman could handle the psychological pressure of combat operations. What made Harrison different was his reputation for being absolutely fair in his assessments, regardless of gender, race, or background. If he doubted her capabilities, it was based on something deeper than prejudice. "Sir, I understand the gravity of the responsibility," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "I've completed every advanced combat training program available, including survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. I've logged over 200 hours in combat simulators specifically designed for F-35 operations." Harrison closed her file and leaned back in his chair, studying her with the intense gaze of someone who had learned to read people's souls in the crucible of war. "Simulators don't shoot back, Captain. Simulators don't have wives and children waiting at home. Simulators don't require you to make the choice between saving civilians and completing your mission." The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Sarah understood that this wasn't just about her qualifications or her ability to fly the most advanced fighter jet ever created. This was about trust, leadership, and the kind of moral courage that couldn't be taught in any classroom or simulator. 3 months ago," Harrison continued, "we lost a promising pilot in a training accident. Lieutenant Commander Davis was one of the best natural aviators I'd ever seen. He made one mistake, one moment of hesitation when his systems failed, and he's now recovering from injuries that will keep him grounded for the rest of his career." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew about the accident, of course. The entire aviation community had discussed it in hushed tones. Davis had been flying a routine training mission when his aircraft experienced multiple system failures. In the chaos of emergency procedures, he had hesitated for just a few seconds too long before ejecting, and the delay had nearly cost him his life. "The F-35 is not forgiving," Harrison said, standing and walking to the window that overlooked the flight line where several of the sleek fighters sat waiting for their next mission. "It's a machine that demands absolute confidence, perfect decision-making, and the kind of reflexes that come from deep in your gut, not from your training manual." Sarah watched him stare out at the aircraft, recognizing the look of a man who carried the weight of every pilot under his command. She realized that his reluctance wasn't about her gender or her experience level. It was about the crushing responsibility of sending young aviators into harm's way, knowing that some of them might not return. "Commander," she said quietly, "I know you've read about my father's service record. He flew A-4 Skyhawks in Vietnam and taught me that fear isn't the enemy. Hesitation is. He used to say that the moment you stop trusting your instincts, you become a passenger in your own aircraft." Harrison turned from the window, and for the first time since she had entered the room, Sarah saw something that might have been approval flicker across his features. Your father was a good pilot. I flew with him on 2 joint operations in the Persian Gulf. He had the kind of natural instinct that kept his wingmen alive. The revelation surprised Sarah. Her father had never mentioned knowing Harrison, but military aviators formed bonds that transcended normal relationships. They shared experiences that civilian friends could never understand, and they carried the memories of lost comrades like sacred trusts. But genetics don't guarantee performance, Harrison continued, and reputation doesn't stop bullets or missiles. I need to know that when the shooting starts, you won't freeze. I need to know that when civilian lives hang in the balance, you'll make the hard choice without hesitation. Sarah met his gaze directly, drawing on every ounce of confidence and determination she had built over years of training and preparation. Give me the chance to prove it, sir. Put me through whatever test you think is necessary. I didn't come this far to back down when things get difficult. Harrison studied her for a long moment, then walked back to his desk and picked up her file again. The F-35 program isn't just about individual pilots, Captain. It's about integration with ground forces, coordination with intelligence assets, and split-second decisions that can affect entire military operations. We're not just looking for people who can fly fast and shoot straight. I understand, sir. Do you? Harrison's voice carried a challenge that made Sarah straighten even further. Because if I approve your application, you'll be responsible for missions that could determine the outcome of conflicts that haven't even started yet. You'll be flying over cities filled with innocent people, and your decisions will mean the difference between their safety and their destruction. The weight of responsibility he was describing would have crushed some people, but Sarah felt something ignite deep inside her chest. This was exactly what she had trained for, what she had dreamed about since she was a child watching fighter jets streak across the sky. This was her chance to serve something greater than herself. Harrison made a note in her file, then looked up at her one final time. I'm not approving your application, Captain Mitchell. Not yet. But I'm not denying it either. You have 2 weeks to convince me that you're ready for this responsibility. Report to Lieutenant Colonel Martinez in advanced combat training tomorrow, at Euro 600. If you can survive what he's going to put you through, we'll talk again. As Sarah saluted and prepared to leave, she knew that the next 2 weeks would test every limit she thought she had. But she also knew that her father would be proud of her for taking on the challenge, regardless of the outcome. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez turned out to be everything Sarah had feared and more. The man stood barely 5 feet 8 inches tall, but his presence filled every corner of the training facility like compressed lightning waiting to explode. His reputation for breaking overconfident pilots was legendary, and Sarah quickly understood why Commander Harrison had chosen him to test her limits. The first morning began before sunrise with a scenario that seemed designed to crush her spirit from the start. Martinez led her to a simulator that had been modified to replicate the most challenging combat situations imaginable. The seat was still warm from the previous pilot who had apparently failed whatever test Martinez had devised. Captain Mitchell, Martinez said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real combat and survived to tell about it. This simulator is programmed with actual mission data from classified operations. The scenarios you're about to face are not theoretical exercises. They are recreations of real situations where real pilots had to make impossible choices. Sarah strapped herself into the simulator, her hands automatically moving through the pre-flight checklist she had memorized years ago. The familiar routine helped calm her nerves, but she could feel Martinez watching her every movement with the intensity of a hawk studying its prey. The first scenario dropped her into the middle of a humanitarian crisis. Her mission briefing appeared on the screen in stark military language. Evacuate civilians from a city under siege while neutralizing enemy air defenses that were hidden among residential buildings. The catch was that her ammunition was limited, her fuel was running low, and intelligence reports were contradictory about civilian locations. As the simulation began, Sarah found herself flying over a digital recreation of a Middle Eastern city, where every building could hide either innocent families or enemy combatants. Her radar showed multiple threats, but visual confirmation was impossible from her altitude. The radio crackled with desperate calls from ground forces requesting immediate air support, while simultaneously pleading with her to avoid civilian casualties. Time is running out, Captain. Martinez's voice cut through her headset. Ground. Forces are taking heavy casualties and civilian evacuation vehicles are under direct fire. What's your decision? Sarah's training kicked in as she analyzed the tactical situation. The enemy had positioned their anti-aircraft weapons in an elementary school and a hospital, knowing that attacking those locations would result in civilian casualties. But allowing the weapons to remain active would doom the evacuation convoy and the ground forces protecting it. She made her choice in less than 10 seconds, but those seconds felt like hours. Instead of attacking the obvious targets, Sarah identified a pattern in the enemy fire that revealed a command center in a commercial building that appeared empty. She directed her weapons at the command structure, disrupting enemy communications and causing enough confusion to allow the evacuation to proceed while minimizing civilian casualties. Interesting approach, Martinez said as the scenario ended. But you left enemy weapons active that killed 12 ground soldiers in the follow-up phase. Was saving civilian lives worth the cost in military personnel? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. In the simulator, those 12 soldiers were just numbers on a screen. But she knew that in real combat, each of those numbers would represent someone's son, daughter, husband, or wife. The weight of command decisions was becoming more real with each passing minute. I made the best choice I could with the information available, Sarah replied, trying to keep the emotion out of her voice. Sometimes there are no perfect solutions, only decisions you can live with. Martinez nodded approvingly and loaded the next scenario. This one placed her in command of a 4-aircraft formation protecting a medical evacuation helicopter in hostile territory. The situation quickly deteriorated when enemy fighters appeared on her radar, outnumbering her flight 3-1. The mathematical odds were simple. She could engage the enemy fighters and likely win the battle, but doing so would leave the medical helicopter exposed to ground fire for the critical minutes needed to complete the evacuation. Alternatively, she could focus on protecting the helicopter, but that would allow enemy fighters to potentially call in reinforcements and doom any future rescue operations. Sarah chose a third option that required splitting her formation and coordinating a complex series of maneuvers that would provide cover for the helicopter, while simultaneously engaging the enemy fighters. The plan worked, but barely, and only because she had remembered an unconventional tactic her father had mentioned during one of their long conversations about combat flying. "Where did you learn that maneuver?" Martinez asked after the simulation ended. "My father described something similar from Vietnam," Sarah replied. "He said that sometimes the textbook answers will get you killed, and you have to trust your instincts to find solutions that nobody has thought of before." Martinez made notes on his tablet, but his expression remained unreadable. "Your father's war was different from the conflicts we face today. Technology has changed the battlefield in ways that make old tactics dangerous." Sarah understood the warning, but she also recognized that Martinez was testing more than her tactical knowledge. He was evaluating her ability to adapt, to think creatively under pressure, and to make decisions based on incomplete information. These were skills that couldn't be taught through conventional training programs. The scenarios continued for 8 hours straight, each one designed to push Sarah further toward her breaking point. She faced situations where she had to choose between saving her wingman and completing her mission, where she had to decide whether to trust questionable intelligence reports, and where she had to balance military objectives against humanitarian concerns. By late afternoon, Sarah's flight suit was soaked with sweat, and her hands were trembling from the constant stress of making life-and-death decisions every few minutes. But Martinez showed no signs of stopping. If anything, he seemed to be increasing the pressure with each new scenario. "Final test for today," Martinez announced, as he loaded what appeared to be the most complex scenario yet. "You're flying air, support for a special operations mission to rescue hostages from a terrorist compound. The compound is located in the middle of a refugee camp with over 10,000 civilians." Sarah's heart sank as she realized the implications. Any weapons fired at the compound would risk massive civilian casualties, but failing to provide adequate support would doom both the hostages and the special operations team attempting to rescue them. The scenario began with her circling high above the refugee camp, watching through her targeting systems as tiny figures moved between rows of temporary shelters. Her radio crackled with reports from the ground team as they approached the compound, requesting immediate air support if their position became compromised. Everything went wrong at once. The ground team's position was discovered, triggering a massive firefight that spilled out into the refugee camp. Enemy fighters launched from a nearby airfield and surface-to-air missiles began tracking her aircraft. In the chaos, she lost radio contact with half of her support elements, and her fuel gauge showed that she had perhaps 20 minutes of flying time remaining. Sarah found herself facing the kind of impossible situation that had probably ended. More military careers than enemy action. Every choice carried the potential for disaster. Every decision could result in consequences that would haunt her for the rest of her life. But instead of panic, she felt a strange calm settle over her consciousness. This was the moment her entire life had been preparing her for, the test that would determine whether she was truly ready for the responsibility that Commander Harrison had described. She made her choices quickly and decisively, coordinating a rescue operation that required perfect timing and flawless execution. When the simulation finally ended, Martinez sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the results displayed on his screen. "Tomorrow we continue," he finally said. "Be here at 500, and Captain, get some sleep. The real tests are just beginning." Sarah's second week of testing pushed her beyond anything she had experienced in her military career. Martinez had replaced the simulator exercises with live flight training in actual F-35 aircraft, but these weren't ordinary training flights. Each mission was designed to test her ability to make split-second decisions while managing the incredible complexity of the world's most advanced fighter jet. The F-35 Lightning II was more than just an aircraft. It was a flying computer system that processed information from dozens of sensors simultaneously, while maintaining stealth characteristics that made it nearly invisible to enemy radar. Sarah had studied the technical specifications for months, but actually flying the machine was like learning to conduct an orchestra while riding a rocket. Her first live flight took place during a joint exercise with Marine ground forces who were conducting urban warfare training in a mock city built specifically for military exercises. Sarah's mission was to provide close air support while avoiding simulated civilian casualties represented by sensors placed throughout the training area. "Remember, Captain," Martinez's voice crackled through her helmet radio as she approached the target zone. "Every decision you make down there will be monitored and evaluated. The sensors will record exactly where your weapons would have impacted, and any civilian casualties will be counted against your performance rating." Sarah acknowledged the transmission while simultaneously processing the flood of information appearing on her helmet-mounted display system. The F-35's advanced sensors were painting a detailed picture of the battlefield below, identifying friendly forces, potential targets, and civilian areas with remarkable precision. But the technology was only as good as the pilot's ability to interpret and act on the information it provided. The ground forces were advancing through the mock city when they encountered heavy resistance from opposing forces playing the role of enemy combatants. Sarah could see the tactical situation developing through her aircraft's sensors, but she also knew that the friendly forces were following a strict rules of engagement that limited their ability to respond to threats that might be hiding among civilian areas. "Lightning 1, this is Ground Team Alpha," came the urgent transmission from the Marine commander leading the ground assault. "We're taking heavy fire from the building at grid coordinates 334521. Can you confirm hostile activity and provide fire support?" Sarah studied the building through her targeting system. Her sensors indicated heat signatures and movement consistent with enemy combatants, but they also showed what appeared to be civilian heat signatures in adjacent buildings. The tactical computer was recommending a precision strike that would neutralize the threat while minimizing collateral damage, but Sarah knew that even the most precise weapons could have unintended consequences. "Ground Team Alpha, Lightning 1, I have eyes on your target. I'm showing possible civilian presence in structures within the blast radius. Can you confirm evacuation of civilian areas?" The response came back immediately, tinged with the stress of combat. "Lightning 1, civilians are supposed to be clear, but we can't confirm complete evacuation. We need immediate fire support or we're going to lose people down here. Sarah found herself facing exactly the kind of decision that Commander A. Harrison had warned her about. The lives of Marines on the ground were depending on her support, but authorizing an airstrike without absolute certainty about civilian locations could result in exactly the kind of tragedy that ended military careers and haunted pilots for the rest of their lives. She made her decision based on a combination of sensor data, tactical analysis, and the kind of instinct that her father had talked about during their conversations about combat flying. Instead of using her primary weapon system, Sarah employed a combination of non-lethal countermeasures and precision strikes that neutralized the threat while creating escape routes for any civilians who might be in the area. The exercise continued for 3 hours, with Sarah providing support for multiple ground operations while managing fuel consumption, weapons allocation, and the constant stream of information flowing through her aircraft systems. By the time she returned to base, her flight suit was drenched with sweat, and her hands were cramped from gripping the flight controls. Martinez was waiting for her in the debriefing room, surrounded by computer screens showing detailed analyses of every decision she had made during the flight. The data included precise measurements of weapons accuracy, fuel efficiency, communication protocols, and response times to ground support requests. "Your technical performance was acceptable," Martinez began, which Sarah had learned was high praise from the demanding instructor. "Your weapons accuracy was within acceptable parameters and your fuel management showed good operational awareness. But I want to discuss your decision-making process during the urban combat scenario." Sarah sat down across from Martinez, prepared for a detailed analysis of every choice she had made during the exercise. This was the part of training that separated good pilots from exceptional ones, the ability to learn from each mission and continuously improve performance under pressure. When Ground Team Alpha requested fire support, you hesitated for approximately 12 seconds before engaging, Martinez continued. In real combat, that delay could have cost lives. What was going through your mind during those 12 seconds, Sarah? Had been expecting this question. I was analyzing sensor data to confirm civilian locations and evaluating alternative engagement strategies that would neutralize the threat while minimizing potential collateral damage. I believe the delay was justified by the reduced risk of civilian casualties. Martinez nodded and made notes on his tablet. Your analysis was correct, and your alternative engagement strategy was effective. But you need to understand that in real combat situations, ground forces don't always have the luxury of waiting for perfect solutions. Sometimes a good decision made quickly is better than a perfect decision made too late. The criticism stung because Sarah knew it was accurate. She had been so focused on avoiding mistakes that she had potentially endangered the Marines she was supposed to protect. The balance between thoroughness and speed was one of the most difficult aspects of combat leadership, and she was still learning to find the right equilibrium. Tomorrow we're going to test your ability to command multiple aircraft in a complex operation, Martinez announced. You'll be leading a 4-ship formation providing support for a simulated hostage rescue mission. The scenario is based on an actual operation that took place 6 months ago. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Leading multiple aircraft was exponentially more complex than flying solo missions. She would be responsible not only for her own decisions, but for coordinating the actions of other pilots, while maintaining situational awareness of a rapidly changing tactical environment. The mission will require precision timing, flawless communication, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances without losing focus on the primary objective, Martinez continued. You'll be evaluated on tactical leadership, decision-making, under pressure, and your ability to prioritize multiple competing demands simultaneously. That evening, Sarah spent hours studying the technical manuals and tactical procedures for multi-aircraft operations. She reviewed communication protocols, formation flying techniques, and the complex coordination required for successful close air support missions. But she also found herself thinking about her father's stories from Vietnam, particularly his descriptions of the trust and communication required for effective combat flying. Her father had often talked about the unique bond between pilots who flew combat missions together. He described it as a kind of telepathic connection that developed between aviators who learned to trust each other completely. knowing that their lives depended on split-second coordination and absolute reliability. As Sarah prepared for sleep, she realized that the next day's test would determine not just whether she was qualified to fly the F-35, but whether she had the kind of leadership qualities necessary to command other pilots in combat situations. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. Commander Harrison's words echoed in her mind as she tried to fall asleep. When civilian lives hang in the balance, you'll make the hard choice without hesitation. Tomorrow would test whether she truly understood what those words meant and whether she had the courage to live up to them when everything was on the line. The stakes were higher than just her own career now. Other pilots would be depending on her leadership, and innocent lives would hang in the balance of every decision she made. Sarah knew that this was exactly what she had trained for her entire life, but knowing it intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were entirely different challenges. The morning of Sarah's final evaluation arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made veteran pilots superstitious about perfect flying weather. She arrived at the briefing room to find 3 other F-35 pilots already seated around the conference table, each one a decorated combat veteran with more flight hours and real-world experience than she had accumulated in her entire career. Major Tom Viper Rodriguez had flown combat missions over Afghanistan and Iraq, with a reputation for ice-cold, nerves under fire. Captain Lisa Phoenix Chen was one of only 12 female pilots certified for F-35 operations, and her precision flying was legendary throughout the naval aviation community. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Steele Washington rounded out the formation, a former Navy SEAL who had transitioned to aviation after being wounded in ground operations. Martinez entered the room carrying a thick folder marked with classification stamps that Sarah couldn't read from her position across the table. The weight of whatever operation he was about to describe was evident in his expression, which had lost its usual sardonic amusement and been replaced by the serious demeanor of someone discussing life and death matters. "Ladies and gentlemen," Martinez began, "today's exercise is based on Operation Nightfall, which took place 8 months ago in a location that remains classified. The mission involved a hostage rescue operation in an urban environment, with significant civilian populations and complex enemy air defenses." He activated the large display screen that dominated one wall of the briefing room, revealing satellite imagery of a Middle Eastern city that Sarah didn't recognize. The images showed a densely populated urban area with narrow streets, crowded markets, and a mixture of modern buildings and traditional architecture that would make any military operation extremely challenging. "The scenario is as follows," Martinez continued, using a laser pointer to highlight specific locations on the map. 12 American civilians, including 3 children, are being held by hostile forces in this compound located in the heart of the old city. Intelligence indicates that the hostages are being moved every 6 hours to prevent rescue attempts, and we have a narrow window of opportunity to extract them. Sarah studied the tactical situation while Martinez outlined the mission parameters. The target compound was surrounded by residential buildings, a busy marketplace, and a school that would be filled with children during the planned operation time. Enemy air defenses were positioned throughout the city, and intelligence reports indicated the presence of shoulder-fired missiles that could threaten low-flying aircraft. "Captain Mitchell," Martinez said, turning his attention directly to her, "you will be leading this formation as Lightning 1. Your primary responsibility is mission command, tactical coordination, and overall operational success. The lives of 12 hostages and a 20-person ground assault team depend on your decisions." The weight of command settled over Sarah's shoulders like a physical burden. She had trained for this moment throughout her entire military career, but the reality of being responsible for so many lives was both humbling and terrifying. Every decision she made would ripple outward, affecting not just her own safety but the survival of everyone involved in the operation. Major Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious as he studied the mission briefing. "What's the timeline for this operation? How long do we have from initial insertion to extraction?" "Ground team insertion begins at 1400 hours, Martinez replied. "You'll have approximately 45 minutes from the start of the operation until..." enemy reinforcements can respond effectively. After that window closes, the tactical situation becomes exponentially more dangerous. Captain Chen raised her hand to ask about civilian evacuation procedures, a question that highlighted one of the most challenging aspects of urban combat operations. Martinez's response confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the mission complexity. Civilian. Evacuation is not possible without compromising operational security, he explained. The enemy is using civilian populations as human shields, and any attempt to clear the area would alert them to our intentions. You'll need to plan your engagement strategies with the assumption that innocent people will be present throughout the target zone. Lieutenant Commander Washington nodded grimly, his experience as a former SEAL giving him insight into the ground perspective of such operations. What about enemy response capabilities? Are we looking at organized military resistance or irregular forces with limited coordination? Martinez's answer made Sarah's stomach tighten with apprehension. Intelligence indicates a combination of both. The primary enemy force consists of well-trained insurgents with military experience and access to sophisticated weapon systems. They also have support from local militia groups who know the terrain intimately and have established escape routes throughout the city. The briefing continued for another hour as Martinez outlined communication protocols, emergency procedures, and the complex coordination required between air and ground forces. Sarah found herself taking detailed notes while simultaneously visualizing the tactical challenges they would face during the actual operation. When the briefing concluded, the 4 pilots had 30 minutes to conduct their own flight planning session. This was where Sarah's leadership abilities would be tested as she coordinated with 3 highly experienced aviators who had their own ideas about optimal tactics and mission execution. "All right, people," Sarah began, trying to project confidence despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Let's talk about formation assignments and tactical responsibilities. Major Rodriguez, I want you flying as my wingman with primary responsibility for air-to-air threats. Captain Chen, you'll take the left flank position and handle precision strikes against ground targets. Lieutenant Commander Washington, you've got the right flank and overall situational awareness." The discussion that followed was intense and professional, with each pilot contributing their expertise to develop the most effective operational plan possible. Sarah found herself drawing on every piece of training she had received, while also incorporating suggestions from pilots whose combat experience exceeded her own. Major Rodriguez raised concerns about fuel management during extended loiter operations, pointing out that the F-35's stealth capabilities required significant energy consumption that could limit their operational endurance. Captain Chen suggested alternative weapon configurations that would provide maximum flexibility for engaging both air and ground targets without compromising their primary mission objectives. Lieutenant Commander Washington's ground combat experience proved invaluable as he described the perspective of assault team members who would be depending on air support while navigating hostile urban terrain. His insights helped Sarah understand the critical timing requirements that would determine mission success or failure. As they walked toward their aircraft, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that always preceded challenging flights. But this time the emotional stakes were higher because she wasn't just responsible for her own performance. 3 other pilots were trusting her leadership, and the simulated lives of hostages and ground team members hung in the balance of every decision she would make over the next few hours. The F-35 Lightning II sat on the flight line like a technological predator, its sleek lines and angular surfaces designed to slip through enemy radar defenses while delivering devastating firepower with surgical precision. Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection with the methodical thoroughness that had been drilled into her since flight training began. But her mind was already racing ahead to the tactical challenges waiting in the target zone. As she strapped herself into the cockpit and began the engine start sequence, Sarah thought about her father's advice regarding combat leadership. He had once told her that the hardest part of command wasn't making the right decisions under pressure. It was living with the consequences of those decisions long after the shooting stopped. Today would test whether she truly understood what he meant and whether she had the moral courage to make impossible choices when innocent lives hung in the balance. The engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that always accompanied The transition from planning to action. Lightning Flight, this is Control Tower, came the radio transmission that officially began the mission. You are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting and bring everyone home safe. Sarah acknowledged the transmission while leading her formation toward the runway, knowing that the next few hours would determine not just her future in the F-35 program, but her understanding of what it truly meant to serve as a military officer, responsible for protecting both her fellow service members and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire of conflict. The mission began exactly as planned, with Sarah's four-ship formation arriving over the target zone at precisely 1400 hours. The city sprawled beneath them like a complex maze of ancient streets and modern buildings. While her aircrafts advanced, sensors painted a detailed picture of the tactical situation developing on the ground below. Lightning Flight, this is Groundhog Actual, came the transmission from the assault team leader as his forces moved into position around the target compound. We have eyes on the objective. Hostiles are visible in overwatch positions on rooftops throughout the sector. Request immediate assessment of air defense threats. Sarah studied her helmet-mounted display, which showed radar signatures and heat sources scattered throughout the urban landscape. The enemy had positioned themselves expertly, using civilian buildings as cover while maintaining clear fields of fire toward any approaching ground forces. Her tactical computer identified at least 6 potential surface-to-air missile sites, each one positioned to create overlapping zones of deadly coverage. Groundhog Actual, Lightning 1. I'm showing multiple SAM sites with overlapping coverage patterns. We can neutralize 3 of the sites without risking civilian casualties, but the remaining 3 are positioned in residential areas. Recommend alternative insertion routes to avoid direct exposure. The ground team leader's response carried the tension of soldiers preparing for combat in an impossible tactical situation. Lightning 1. Alternative routes would add 15 minutes to our approach time. Intelligence indicates hostage movement is scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. We need those SAM sites neutralized now. Sarah felt the familiar weight of command decisions as she analyzed the tactical options available to her formation. Each potential course of action carried significant risks, but doing nothing would doom both the hostages and the ground assault. Team to almost certain failure. Lightning 2, Lightning 3, she transmitted to Major Rodriguez and Captain Chen. Coordinate precision strikes on SAM sites Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Lightning 4, maintain overwatch and prepare for immediate response to air threats. All aircraft, remember we have civilian populations throughout the engagement zone. The next few minutes unfolded with the precise choreography of highly trained military professionals executing a complex operation under extreme pressure. Major Rodriguez and Captain Chen eliminated the designated SAM sites with surgical strikes that neutralized the threats while avoiding collateral damage to surrounding buildings. But as Sarah had feared, the remaining surface-to-air missiles immediately became active, forcing her formation to operate under constant threat while providing support to the ground assault team. Her aircraft's radar warning system activated continuously as enemy operators attempted to lock onto her formation with targeting systems designed to bring down even the most advanced stealth fighters. Lightning 1, Groundhog Actual, came the urgent transmission that Sarah had been dreading. We have encountered heavy resistance at the primary objective. Need immediate close air support on the building at grid coordinates 445229. Break. Be advised, we have confirmed civilian presence in adjacent structures. Sarah's heart rate accelerated as she identified the target building through her aircraft's sensors. The structure was packed with enemy combatants who were directing devastating fire against the assault team, but it was also surrounded by residential buildings that showed clear heat signatures indicating civilian occupancy. Groundhog Actual, Lightning 1. I have positive identification on your target, but I'm showing significant civilian presence in the immediate area. Can you confirm evacuation status? The response came back immediately, strained with the stress of intense combat. Lightning 1 negative on civilian evacuation. We don't have time. Hostages are being moved as we speak and we're taking casualties down here. Need immediate fire support or we're going to lose this mission. Sarah found herself facing exactly the kind of impossible decision that Commander Harrison had warned her about during their initial meeting. The ground team was depending on her support to save 12 American hostages, but authorizing an airstrike in a densely populated civilian area could result in exactly the kind of tragedy that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Her tactical training provided multiple options, but each one carried unacceptable risks or unacceptable delays. The mathematical calculations were simple. She could save the assault team and potentially the hostages by accepting civilian casualties, or she could protect the civilians and potentially lose both the rescue team and the people they were trying to save. But Sarah remembered her father's words about trusting instincts over textbooks, and suddenly she saw a third option that her tactical computer hadn't calculated. Instead of attacking the building directly, she could use the F-35's advanced electronic warfare capabilities to disrupt enemy communications while simultaneously creating a diversion that would allow the ground team to approach from an unexpected direction. Lightning Flight Lightning 1, change of plans. Lightning 2 and 3. I need you to create a noise demonstration on the north side of the target zone while I conduct electronic warfare operations against enemy communications. Lightning 4. Be prepared to engage any air threats that respond to our activity. Major Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset with professional concern. Lightning 1. Electronic warfare operations won't neutralize the enemy positions directly. Ground team is still going to face heavy resistance. Sarah was already implementing her plan as she responded. Negative, Lightning 2. I'm not trying to neutralize the positions. I'm trying to isolate them from their command structure and create enough confusion to give Groundhog a tactical advantage. The plan worked better than Sarah had dared hope. Her electronic warfare systems jammed enemy communications throughout the sector, while the demonstration flights by Rodriguez and Chen drew enemy attention away from the actual assault route. The ground team was able to approach the target compound from an unexpected direction, achieving tactical surprise that made direct air support unnecessary. Lightning 1, Groundhog Actual, came the transmission that made Sarah's heart soar. We have secured the hostages. Repeat, all 12 hostages are in friendly custody and uninjured. Beginning extraction procedures now. But the mission was far from over. Sarah's formation had been operating in hostile airspace for nearly an hour, and her fuel gauges were showing that they were approaching the point where return to base would become mandatory regardless of the ground situation. Lightning Flight. Be advised we have multiple enemy aircraft launching from airfields to the north and east. Came the warning from the airborne control aircraft that had been monitoring the broader tactical situation. Estimate 12 to 15. Enemy fighters inbound to your location with approximately 10 minutes until intercept. Sarah analyzed the tactical situation with the cold calculation that months of training had ingrained in her decision-making process. Her formation was outnumbered more than 3 to 1, operating in enemy airspace with limited fuel and ammunition remaining. The logical decision would be to withdraw immediately and allow other forces to handle the air threat. But the ground extraction team was still 15 minutes away from the designated pickup zone, and abandoning them would leave both the rescue team and the recovered hostages vulnerable to enemy ground forces that were already responding to the assault on the compound. Lightning Flight, Lightning 1. We're staying to provide cover for the extraction. Lightning 2. Take your element high and engage the lead enemy formation. Lightning 3 and 4. Stay with me and provide close air support for Groundhog's movement to the extraction zone. What followed was 10 minutes of aerial combat that tested every skill Sarah had developed throughout her aviation career. Enemy fighters swept through the engagement zone and coordinated attacks designed to overwhelm her formation's defensive capabilities, while ground-based air defense systems created a deadly crossfire that forced constant maneuvering to avoid being shot down. Sarah found herself flying the F-35 at the edge of its performance envelope, using every advanced capability the aircraft possessed while simultaneously coordinating the defensive actions of her formation. The stealth characteristics that made the Lightning II nearly invisible to enemy radar became crucial as she maneuvered to avoid missile locks while directing precision strikes against ground threats that were endangering the extraction operation. Lightning 1, Groundhog Actual, came the transmission she had been waiting for. All personnel and hostages are secure at the extraction zone. We are ready for immediate departure. Sarah acknowledged the transmission while simultaneously launching her final air-to-air missile at an enemy fighter that had managed to achieve a targeting lock on Captain Chen's aircraft. The missile found its mark, eliminating the threat and clearing the way for her formation to begin their withdrawal from the combat zone. Lightning Flight, Lightning 1. Mission complete. All aircraft, set course for home base. Excellent work, people. As they flew away from the target zone, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that always followed intense combat operations. But she also felt something else, a deep sense of satisfaction that came from knowing she had successfully led her formation through an impossible situation without losing a single aircraft or failing to achieve their primary mission objectives. The flight back to base gave her time to reflect on the decisions she had made and the lessons learned from her first experience as a formation leader in combat operations. She had trusted her instincts over conventional tactics, prioritized mission success over personal safety, and demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking that separated exceptional military leaders from merely competent ones. Outstanding mission leadership, Lightning 1, came Major Rodriguez's voice over the radio as they approached their home airfield. That electronic warfare gambit was inspired. I've never seen anything like it in 15 years of combat flying. Similar praise came from Captain Chen and Lieutenant Commander Washington. But Sarah knew that the real test would come during the debriefing session with Martinez and ultimately in her final evaluation meeting with Commander Harrison. The mission had been successful, but success alone wasn't enough to earn approval for the F-35 program. As she guided her aircraft through the landing pattern and touched down on the runway, Sarah realized that regardless of the evaluation results, she had proven something important to herself. She had the moral courage and tactical judgment necessary to lead other pilots in combat operations, and she could make the hard decisions that command responsibility required. The question now was whether Commander Harrison would reach the same conclusion. 3 days after the training mission, Sarah found herself once again standing in Commander Harrison's office. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. Martinez sat in a chair beside Harrison's desk, and both men were studying a thick folder that Sarah assumed contained every detail of her performance over the past 2 weeks. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before Harrison finally looked up from the documents and fixed her with the same intense stare that had intimidated her during their first meeting. But now Sarah met his gaze with the confidence of someone who had been tested in the crucible of simulated combat and emerged stronger. Captain Mitchell, Harrison began, his voice carrying a tone she couldn't quite interpret. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez has provided me with a detailed assessment of your performance during the training period. The results are interesting. Sarah maintained her military bearing while her heart hammered against her ribs. Everything she had worked toward throughout her entire career was about to be decided by whatever conclusions these two men had reached about her capabilities and judgment. Martinez leaned forward in his chair, and for the first time since Sarah had met him, his expression showed something that might have been approval. Captain, in 23 years of training combat pilots, I have never seen anyone adapt to complex tactical situations as quickly as you demonstrated during the final exercise. The praise caught Sarah completely off guard. Throughout the training period, Martinez had been relentlessly critical, pushing her to her absolute limits while offering minimal encouragement. She had assumed that his silence after the mission debriefing meant that her performance had been inadequate. Your decision to use electronic warfare capabilities to achieve tactical objectives without direct engagement was inspired, Martinez continued. You demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking that modern combat operations require. More importantly, you showed the moral courage to find solutions that protected civilian lives while still accomplishing your mission. Harrison nodded in agreement, but his expression remained serious. However, there are still concerns that need to be addressed. Your tendency toward thorough analysis before making decisions could be problematic in situations where immediate action is required. Combat doesn't always provide the luxury of perfect information. Sarah had been expecting this criticism. During her debriefing sessions, Martinez had repeatedly emphasized the importance of rapid decision-making under pressure, and she knew that her analytical approach sometimes resulted in delays that could be costly in real combat situations. Sir, I understand the concern, Sarah replied. I've been working on reducing my decision-making timeline while maintaining tactical accuracy. I believe the final exercise demonstrated significant improvement in that area. Harrison made a note in the folder before continuing. There's another issue we need to discuss. The F-35 program isn't just about individual pilot performance. It's about integration with special operations forces who operate under completely different protocols and time constraints than conventional military units. This was territory that Sarah hadn't fully considered during her training. She understood the technical aspects of close air support and the tactical requirements for coordinating with ground forces, but she was beginning to realize that working with special operations presented unique challenges that went beyond standard military procedures. Special operations missions often require pilots to make decisions based on incomplete information while operating in politically sensitive environments, Harrison explained. The consequences of mistakes aren't just tactical, they're strategic and diplomatic. One poorly timed airstrike can change the entire political landscape of a region. The weight of responsibility Harrison was describing was staggering. Sarah had focused her training on tactical proficiency and mission success, but she was starting to understand that F-35 pilots operated at the intersection of military capability and political reality. Martinez pulled out another document from the folder and placed it on Harrison's desk. Captain Mitchell, I want you to read this intelligence report from a mission that took place 6 months ago. It involves a situation very similar to what you faced during your final training exercise. Sarah read the classified document with growing understanding of why her training had been so intensely focused on decision-making under pressure. The real mission had involved a hostage rescue operation in an urban environment where civilian casualties had been avoided only through the exceptional judgment of the air support commander. But the report also detailed a follow-up operation 2 weeks later where a different pilot had made different choices, resulting in civilian casualties that had created a diplomatic crisis lasting several months. The contrast between the two operations illustrated exactly why Commander Harrison was so selective about F-35 pilot assignments. The pilot in the second operation was technically proficient and tactically sound, Harrison said as Sarah finished reading. But he lacked the moral judgment necessary to balance military objectives against humanitarian concerns. His decisions were defensible from a purely tactical perspective, but they created strategic problems that are still affecting our operations in that region. Sarah understood now why her training had emphasized impossible choices and moral dilemmas, as much as technical proficiency. The F-35 program required pilots who could think beyond immediate tactical success to consider the broader implications of their actions. Sir, Sarah said, carefully choosing her words, I believe my training has prepared me to handle those kinds of complex decisions. I understand that every choice I make in the cockpit carries consequences that extend far beyond the immediate mission. Harrison exchanged a look with Martinez before opening another section of the folder. There's one more test we need to discuss, Captain. Tomorrow morning you'll be participating in a real-world mission. Not a training exercise, not a simulation, but an actual operation where your decisions will have real consequences. Sarah's pulse quickened as Harrison outlined the mission parameters. Intelligence had identified a terrorist cell operating in a Middle Eastern city that was planning attacks against American interests. The operation would involve close coordination with special operations forces and would require exactly the kind of complex decision-making that her training had emphasized. The mission is classified at the highest levels, Harrison continued, and your participation will be evaluated by senior military leadership who are monitoring the F-35 program's integration with special operations. This is your final test, Captain Mitchell. Success will earn you a permanent position in the program. Failure will end your military aviation career. The stakes couldn't have been higher, but Sarah felt a calm confidence settling over her consciousness. Every challenge she had faced over the past 2 weeks had prepared her for exactly this kind of responsibility. Her father's words about trusting instincts over textbooks echoed in her mind as she prepared to accept the mission that would define her future. I understand, sir, Sarah replied with the steady voice of someone who had found her purpose. When do we brief? Harrison smiled for the first time since Sarah had met him, and she realized that this moment represented more than just professional approval. It represented acceptance into a brotherhood of aviators who carried the responsibility of protecting innocent lives while serving their country's interests in an increasingly complex world. 500 tomorrow morning, Harrison said. And Captain, welcome to the F-35 program. Don't make me regret this decision. As Sarah saluted and prepared to leave, she felt the weight of responsibility settling over her shoulders like a familiar jacket. Tomorrow would bring real combat, real decisions, and real consequences. But she was ready for whatever challenges awaited, knowing that her training had prepared her not just to fly the world's most advanced fighter jet, but to serve as a guardian for those who couldn't protect themselves. The little girl who had watched Blue Angels soar over her hometown airshow had grown up to become exactly what she had dreamed of. A pilot trusted with the most sophisticated aircraft ever built and the moral authority to use it in defense of innocent lives. Tomorrow would prove whether that trust was justified, but tonight Sarah Mitchell slept with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her true calling.